Hello, everybody.
Oh, look at that.
Here live in NYU, as well as out on Facebook. You might be watching us. I'm Roy Shamir. I'm the co-chair of the AES New York section. And AES New York committee and officers are very pleased to put on this event today. The title is Past, Present, and Future of Sound Field and Object-Based Audio Applications. We're going to objectify the discussion. And I'm going to introduce the moderator, which is Denise Barbarita, and she's going to take it from here. We'll be having a raffle at the end for those of you who joined us in person. And I want to let everyone out there on Facebook know we have another event next week, October 5th, regarding Dolby Atmos. Please join us for that as well. You can still buy a ticket, or you can watch it on Facebook Live. All right, thank you, and thanks to the panelists. We really appreciate this, and thanks to NYU for providing the venue.
I get my cheat sheet back now. So, as has already been discussed, my name is Denise Barbarita. I am the owner and head engineer of MONOLisa Studios in Miami City. I would like to introduce to you folks that you probably know already, most of you, but we'll just start with Paul Geluso. He's the program director of music technology, music assistant professor in the Department of Music Performing Arts Professions here at NYU. Thank you so much for being here. Should I be closer to this mic, Roy?
Okay, you're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then we have Kari Sangwon, and she is the studio manager, and she's also a recording engineer here at James Dolan Studio. And then we have Agnieszka Roginska? Okay.
Both versions work.
She's a music professor at NYU, and also the past president of AES Society. So I want to thank you all so much for being here. Can we turn this down a little bit? It seems like it's ringing well. Oh, perfect.
I'll be good.
Consummate professional. Always on call. All right, so we are basically talking about sound field and object-based audio applications here. So if you were here for maybe interpretive dance or in the wrong room, I think that this is going to be a really fun discussion, and we are going to be able to get a lot of answers to a lot of questions. I can tell you that my foray into, I guess what you want to call spatial audio or immersive, is I literally had a client that I've been working with who do 360 video, who basically said, okay, we need you to start mixing in 360 now. And I'm like, okay, sure. And they're like, well, wait, take your time. You know, not too much time, but take your time. So I started doing the research, trying to figure out how I'm going to make this happen, and then learned Facebook 360 and got myself kind of immersed in that and excited about it, and then poof, it went away. So then I had to learn another one, and I personally went with AudioEase, their 360 production suite, for my own reasons. But that's basically my intro. So this particular panel, when Rowie had asked, hey, does anybody have a topic of discussion? I'm like, me! So we are going to start off with a presentation that you have already created. And how long is it?
A few minutes.
A few minutes long. So is that on video, yeah?
No, we will talk.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we will
Okay.
talk through it.
So I'm going to give the floor over to our experts here.
Which mic is this?
Is it this one here?
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Thank you for coming on such a rainy and icky New York City day. I'm going to start off just by giving you a very quick overview. We are all three going to give you a very quick overview because here what we're going to be talking about for about an hour or so is sound field and object-based audio. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about those two types of techniques and technologies. So let's start off talking about sound field. A few years ago, Paul and I co-edited a book called Immersive Sound, and we cover the different techniques and science of reproduction and sound capture methods. And one of the chapters that talks about sound field, and Rose and Nicole, who wrote that chapter, describes that sound field refers to the capture, reproduction, and description of sound waves. Right? So sound field, and here we use the generic term sound field, not ambisonics, but really talking about sound field, which is the general concept. So it really describes sound waves. Those are properties that are controlled to capture and reproduce sounds that are physical properties of sound waves, not perceptual properties of sound waves, but really talking about how sound reaches a microphone, how sound hits a point in space. The sound field approach captures all components of the sound. It captures the direct sound, the reflected sound, the diffuse sound, etc. So it doesn't capture any particular aspect of the sound, but aims to capture the entire sound field. And the origins of sound field really date back to, we can talk about Bloomline, and it's really based on the X, Y, and MS techniques. Now, a long time ago in the 70s, Mr. Michael Gerzon came in 1973, he proposed a system where he said, you know what, instead of having this field that focuses on the front, how about we treat all directions in an equal way? So he proposed the system to treat all directions of sound equally by recording the sound pressures that are hitting the capsules on the surface of a sphere, right? So that was his idea, and to capture the sound equally from all directions. And what he did is he looked at decomposing the sound field into spherical harmonics, so looking at how a sphere can be represented by what are called spherical harmonics. How can you have a front direction and the back direction, the left and the right, and an up and a down, which is really the fundamental principle of ambisonics. Is think about 3 figure of 8s. That you have one is pointing front back, the other one is left right, and the third one is up down. And by using that capture, we can represent the entire sphere. So he came up with this 4-channel system, the WXYZ, which I think a lot of people have heard about. We have the W component, which is the zeroth order omnidirectional component. We have the X, Y, and Z, which is the first order component of ambisonics. And in 1977, Gerzon and Craven proposed this tetrahedral microphone configuration, which consisted of 4 cardioid capsules, all pointing in different directions, and a tetrahedron configuration. And this was the basic foundation of the tetrahedral microphone, and a lot of the microphones right now, first order ambisonic microphones, use that tetrahedral configuration. And the beauty about ambisonics is that there's a separation between how you capture something, how you capture a sound field, and how you reproduce it. So an ambisonic sound field capture can be captured, let's say, in the first order, but be reproduced over 4 loudspeakers, 8 loudspeakers, 32 loudspeakers, whatever you have available to you, and vice versa. So we don't have this one-to-one correlation that we do in channel-based formats, right? When you have a 5-1 mix, the assumption is that you're going to be reproducing it over 5-1. With ambisonics, you no longer have this one-to-one correlation. So we just talked about first-order ambisonics. Now, first-order ambisonics has a lot of limitations because you're capturing the sound field in quite a coarse way. Think like fuzzy. So first-order ambisonics FOA allows the capture of the full sphere, but the spatial resolution is not very good. It's quite low because you only have 4 capsules. So when you're trying to discriminate between different sound elements, you're not going to be very accurate. So this is where higher order ambisonics comes in, or HOA as it is often referred to. So a higher number of capsules on the sphere allows you to get a lot more accurate in how you decompose the sound field. So here we have 0th order, that's our omnidirectional component. This is our first order component, and then the more capsules you have, the more accurately you can decompose your space into these spherical harmonics. We have an example of a high order ambisonic microphone, 5th order in this case, the Eigenmic.
Sure. Yeah, so I'd like to talk about the more practical uses for ambisonic technology. And the beauty of the ambisonic microphone is you can create an unlimited amount of virtual microphones with one microphone. So this is my workflow, is I take the ambisonic recording, first, second, third, whatever order I have, make several copies of it, and then with something like this, I can select whether I want figure of 8, cardioid, hypercardioid, cardioid, take that signal, route it into my typical mixing environment, be it Atmos or stereo, whatever you have, and you can have you have a lot of microphones in one microphone. So basically, when you put up the sound field, I think of it as an unlimited amount of virtual signals or beams we can use, and then you can reconstruct it. Now, when you read about ambisonic technology, a lot of the times the decoders just take the ambisonic signal and build what we call a scene. Where a scene, sometimes we say it's kind of like paint on the wall, like a scene like this. But you can use that same signal to pick out things within the scene and do whatever you want with it. We have a lot of freedom with this microphone and the tools. And I think very often it's just thought of, this one application where you put it up and you reproduce this 360-degree screen, which is amazing, but you can do a lot more. You can do a lot more with that signal and get very creative with it. So it's a very, very practical way to record. Next slide. Yeah. So, who's talking about objects? Okay, sorry.
All right. So now that we covered a little bit of the ambisonic, the sound field ambisonics, let's talk about what object-based audio is. So we define sound objects and object-based audio as waveforms or audio elements that are together bundled with metadata, with descriptors, with data that describes something about those objects. That embody the artistic intent, specifying the transition from the audio elements to the loudspeaker signals. So sound objects generally use monophonic audio tracks. They're represented as a monophonic sound source, and that have been recorded and synthesized through a process of sound design. And those objects are bundled together with information or metadata. So the metadata describes information about the sound object, its location, where it is, and other parameters about it, how loud it is, and so on. It is very, very often used in cinema, right? We all know that Dolby Atmos, a lot of theaters know are equipped with Dolby Atmos because it is so nicely conducive to having a very compelling experience, and an experience that is optimized for that particular theater. But also, object-based audio is very often used now in audio engines and games and simulations in AR, VR, XR, and so on, because we can easily manipulate the sound experience and describe the environment using a very nicely developed lexicon, using the sounds and the metadata. Object-based audio, what's beautiful about it is that you optimize it once and you can deliver it anywhere. Because there is no longer this association as we have with channel-based audio where you have to reproduce it in a specific configuration. You can configure your environment by using the sounds and the descriptors, this metadata, and then optimize it for whether you're reproducing it over a number of loudspeakers, over headphones, whether you have 8 loudspeakers or 128 loudspeakers, you can optimize it for that kind of environment. I'm going to skip that. So examples of object-based audio systems, of course we all know Dolby Atmos, but that's not the only one. There are others that exist as well. There's DTS:X, MPEG-H, and there are a few others.
So, so we gave a talk at AES in The Hague 2 years ago, 1 year ago? Last year, yeah, and we were talking about building better objects. So we have an opportunity to have a sound object that we can place in using Dolby Atmos along the speakers, or if we're in a gaming or VR, we could use a sound object and put it in a game engine, actually walk around the sound object, and lots of things you can do with objects. What should this object be? Should it just be a mono recording, a stereo recording? And we've been experimenting with using tetrahedral and what we call, Pari's going to talk in a bit about holographic recording techniques, where I've been capturing objects with a tetra mic up close, and where sound field is typically used to collect a scene, we've been experimenting using multiple Tetra mics as a tool for collecting scenes within a scene, let's say, and using them as like objects in themselves. So you can have, say we use a sound field mic to record something like a cello, we can get virtual beams to different parts of the instrument, and also beam backwards to see what the first reflection is off the back wall, or what the reflection from the cello is off the floor, and build just better, more realistic sounding sound objects.
Okay, so this kind of segues into what Paul was mentioning about holographic sound, or what we can also call HSR. So this is something that I also been experimenting on with Paul, including another colleague of mine, Michael Matsakis, who's over at Cloud Davis. So thinking about this is that we're trying to implement, spatial sound in VR. So when we think about it, we're listening to something in perhaps like a game engine or Unity. Pretty much what you're listening to is basically a mono sound source that's applied in the 3D space. The thing is that we're thinking about how can we capture that sound more accurately by recording it three-dimensionally. So we're trying to think about the polar pattern of, not in the microphone, but the polar pattern of the sound source itself. So because as the sound source, including ourselves, we radiate in different ways. So we're focusing on capturing the radiation of a sound source and implementing that into a 3D space within VR or something like that. So this is kind of a little bit of an example. This is from one of the Tonmeister sessions. So you can see here we have, so this is kind of like the drum set that we have, and we're using this array called the reverse tetra. I actually kind of came up with this. So thinking of a way, we have, if we think of an ambisonic microphone, it's a tetrahedral clustral. So what we're doing is we're kind of deconstructing it, pulling it apart, and then turning the capsules inward. So you're capturing the same directions as a tetra microphone, front right up, back right down, all those positions, but this time they're kind of turned inward so that the sound source is actually in the middle of that array. This is similar to the murmur that we have here, and basically we were doing a lot of test trials because different instruments radiate differently. Obviously the murmur is like way bigger. So we're capturing some of the bells from underneath, so we have one microphone underneath and also those other microphones up top. Now we can go beyond just 4 microphones depending on the instrument. So in this case for the murmur, we actually added a center microphone to capture the center of the murmur as well. So it could be expanded if it need be to go with the instrument. Not sure if we'll get audio with this, but maybe. Yeah. So obviously if you wear headphones, you'll hear this as binaural, but this is from that particular session, and basically when you wear your VR headset with Oculus or HTC Vive, you can walk around this instrument, and basically when you listen to it, you actually hear the full radiation of the instrument. So for instance, if I had recorded the drum kit with maybe a stereo or a mono mic, you might only hear the accented, the front of the drum kit. But now that we have this reverse tetra, now if you walk behind the drum kit, you'll actually hear the different nuances. You'll hear a little bit more cymbal and less of the kick. So that's what we're trying to do. We're kind of like making this true, accurate holographic image of the instrument within the VR space. Yeah, so we're still researching on this, Michael and myself, and so basically now we're kind of looking into extending this with spatial room characteristics. So now we're kind of looking into how can we capture ambience more accurately in the VR space. So of course we can use an ambisonic microphone, which works very well. The thing about ambisonic microphone is that it's kind of like the same idea of saying if you have a mono source in front of a sound source, and you have this weird perspective only seeing one side of the instrument. So we're thinking, okay, how can we kind of think of the ambience and think of it as an object itself? And the ambience is just this really big, large object. So we're kind of experimenting on different microphone techniques where we capture the specific reflections at different points in a room. And that way we can reverse the capsules that are capturing the reflections from a wall or something and turn it around in the VR space. And that way you can now have the representation of the room itself in VR. So that's kind of like where we're experimenting on right now. It does require a lot of microphones, but we're doing A/B between, ambisonic microphones, or we're using ambisonics, using the Tetra microphone, which we used, I think, about 4 of those, so that's 16 channels. But you will see, I'm not sure if there's a picture next, but I don't think we have a picture of it. But if you think about it, you see, if you open like Unity, which is what we're using, you'll see all of these polar patterns of the microphone themselves, and you can think of it as little speakers, and they're turned around in different spaces where we kind of recreate that room and recreate those walls. So. And of course, you can actually experience this. We do have a website if you want to connect afterwards. I could kind of let you know where that website is, so you can actually experience that space yourself. Yeah.
So I think I'm mindful of time, so I want to go to the questions. So I think we can move on to the questions. I'm going to put as a backdrop, because the AES convention is coming up in a month. And there are a lot of great sessions that are related to the topics that we're talking about. So as we're answering questions, these are just a few sessions that we kind of pulled out that are related to the discussion that we have going on here. But maybe we can move on to our discussion.
I'm just absolutely fascinated. I am thinking more about practical use of ambisonics as opposed to object-based mixing environments in the questions that I'll be asking. More so because that's my experience and experience of many other people outside of the, I guess the academic world. So there's this question between ambisonics and Atmos, which one is better suited for what type of job? It seems as though I feel anyway, Atmos is the logical extension from 5.1 and lends itself, as you said, to cinema and to film applications, things of that sort, whereas ambisonics has been kind of living in the VR world. Do you see a future, especially with sound field ambisonics, where they could be implemented in real life in terms of playback? Because that seems to be the one thing that I question. Is ambisonic sound field possible for commercial usage in a room? And what would that look like?
Sure. So, if you look in the news, you'll see that our friends, the Dolan's just built an amazing dome in Vegas. This is been cited as the future of entertainment, and ambisonic, higher order ambisonic works in a dome very nicely because it's based on a sphere. So I think for domes and planetariums, and high order ambisonic is very good, very nice system. You can get very good discrete beams and so on. When you're up in the higher harmonics. Also electronic music performance. A lot of electronic music performers use it. There's very good ambisonic implementation for programs like Ableton Live. They have a nice set of tools you can use. So I'm seeing it used in those worlds. Theaters, we sit and we don't really have downward speakers, and we're not in a dome, and Dolby Atmos, and it works wonderfully there. So those are the ambisonic applications. I think very good real world applications outside of the VR world.
On that theme, I question the sweet spot. Is there a such thing as a sweet spot in that type of playback arena? Like, in terms of having multiple people in a space, for example, like you would in a theater, let's say we have 150 people, how large does that space need to be in order for those 150 people to be able to experience the playback accurately?
Well, you know, I think that it's really important to understand the limitations of the systems that we're using. So, you know, ambisonics has been around for decades, but it's not until a few years ago when VR exploded that all of a sudden everybody's talking about ambisonics. Before it was like, oh, you know, the academics were talking about it, and now everybody's using ambisonics. And there's a reason for that. And it's because VR, AR in particular, lends itself really well to using this kind of representation. Ambisonics is great because you can represent the entire sphere using a fairly cheap way to small number of channels, cheap to implement, you know, very easy to do. But it has a lot of limitations. So to your question about, well, what about the sweet spot? When you have loudspeaker reproduction, there is going to be a sweet spot. And I mean, unless you're getting into wavefield synthesis, which is not what we're talking about. But where our discussion here is there will be a sweet spot. How you manage that is really important. And that depends on many factors. It depends on the space, it depends on the acoustics of the space, it depends what kind of experience you're trying to create. I think when we look at the future, we also have to think about the limitations and the advantages of loudspeaker reproduction versus headphone reproduction, because in some ways, you know, they're complementary in nature. And there's no one size fits all. There's no one loudspeaker system that's going to be great for everything. It depends on a lot of factors. So you kind of have to understand what you're trying to build. Whether you're in the theater, whether you're in the studio, whether you're in the sphere, like you really have to understand what kind of experience you're trying to build.
Excellent. Kari, would you like to add on to that?
No, I kind of agree. I think both of them kind of says what it is. I think it is dependable on the end project and what you're going for in the end, and that way you can kind of figure out what tools, if you need to use a loudspeaker reproduction method or using ambisonic microphones, things like that. It's really, I think you have to look at the end goal first, and then you have to then consider like what tools you can use to reach that end goal. So.
Okay.
Back to the sweet spot conversation. You know, my philosophy is you may have to give up the idea everybody hears the exact same thing all the time. I mean, I don't think that's necessary for a successful thing. I mean, I'm okay if someone on the left side hears something a little different on the right side. Maybe you move it from the left to the right, and then everybody hears it at some point.
I mean, that's what we hear now, right? Even whether it's 5.1 or Atmos, where you are in the theater is going to determine how you experience the overall sound.
Yeah, some of it, right? Because the dialogue, you know, things coming out of the center channel are the same for everybody, right? They don't, you know, wherever you're sitting, that's in the center. That's the beauty of the center channel. Everything else is specific on where you're sitting, and the sound designer and film mixers, they know this, and they have to decide, you know, what's going to be slightly different for people. So the sweet spot for some things, no sweet spot from others. I think that's the way most people approach it. We cut to a commercial.
And now,
we're sponsored.
The level increases all of a sudden during commercial.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, from an end user point of view, as a mixing engineer, I guess I would ask you guys, what do you think the most pressing current challenges are in terms of whether you choose ambisonics or whether you choose Atmos? This is really hot.
I keep turning it down.
No, it's ringing in the speaker. And I guess my question is pertaining to, is there one that's preferable for one application, or is there one that's better for another application, or is it content dependent? And what do you think? I think we did mention, we talked about loudness and realizing that that's still something that's being highly debated. Are there things, if you're mixing in ambisonics, that you really need to be aware of as opposed to Atmos, for example, especially when we're thinking about mixing on headphones?
I guess I'll go first.
I know it's a
Yeah,
complicated
yeah.
question, and I apologize.
No, I think, as I said before, it's based, I would say it's based more on content and the end goal, because I would say, like, there's no right or wrong in terms of, like, oh, Amazonic might be better for this, or Atmos might be better for this. Of course, depending on the limitations that we have, yes, there are certain applications where Atmos would make more sense, say, if you're listening to, some kind of, like, immersive, environmental thing that you want to hear, like, surrounding you, then yeah, Atmos might make more sense. But if you're trying to, say, put the listener into the space itself and have them, like, interactivity, obviously if you want something to be interactive to the listener themselves, then VR would make more sense for that. So yeah, I think it depends on content, and then after that you can kind of think forward into, like, okay, what tools or factors I need to kind of consider. I know we mentioned, like, we talked briefly outside about, like, certain limitations in terms of, yes, mixing in VR is very hard, and sometimes maybe we have to decide and find alternatives, maybe push that for the user. Because VR is interactive, might as well give the user some interactive tools where they could mix themselves, the product themselves, since it might not be something that we can control from our end. So that's kind of like it.
I mean, in a sense, I would say that the one challenge that I had was realizing that my perspective has changed as a mixer, right? Because the end user, the person who's going to have the headset on, is actually an actor in the play, right? And the sound itself is part and parcel of the whole experience. We're thinking about being part of, rather than in a film, we're experiencing something that's happening outside of ourselves. So if you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just to add, I mean, they're not exclusive and they can intermingle and work together. For example, I gave some examples where I'm using ambisonic technology, but forming beams and putting them into my Atmos mix. And if you were asked to design something for VR, you could work in Atmos and then convert it to ambisonic. There's software to do that. Technical limitations, I guess, in Atmos, we don't yet have something coming up from the ground.
Right.
So I know Sony 360 has down speakers, so that's the thing I miss with the Atmos system is less what I call speaker-centric system. Ambisonics, the idea was you don't really know where the speakers are. It's it's not speaker-centric. It's based on as Agnieszka said, based on sound waves, on reconstructing sound fields, which tend to be less speaker specific in my experience, where Atmos is still primarily, left, center, right. It's still based on, it's okay if it's speaker centric, because you're in a theater, you need that strong sound coming off the screen so there's no sweet spot. So that's kind of the main technical difference. But, I would encourage people to work both. Either way, going from one system to the other, back or together, they're not exclusive in my mind. Yeah.
So that brings
yes,
please.
Which is, I think that we kind of have to look at the scene and decompose it into the many layers that very often exist, especially when we're talking about cinema, where you have background, and then you have foreground, and you have things that sometimes come much closer to you. There's and so sound field is, it's great for the background stuff, yeah, and you can get away with a lot of things with first order ambisonic. It's the foreground, it's the objects. This is where object-based audio is beautiful, because you can have that crispness, those point sources, right? Point sources are very difficult to do in ambisonic, unless you're like fifth order, very high order ambisonic. Low order ambisonic is very difficult to do, easy to do with object-based audio, to get that sharpness and that bee buzzing around you. There's an added complexity when you get into the VR space, because now you're dealing with a non-linear medium and you are dealing with an interactive medium. So there's nothing preventing a user from taking an object in the VR space and bringing it like this. Well, how do you do that with sound, with ambisonics? Really hard. It's very difficult to do. When you can represent this as an object, you can bring that close to you. So I think in some ways the two systems are complementary. I mean, they have their drawbacks and their advantages. But you have to think about how the listener, how the user will experience it. And you really have to pay attention when it is an interactive system of AR, VR, and so on.
Agreed. They are very, it's a different way of thinking, I think, in VR. Because again, it's an experiential as opposed to just being, an observer. You're no longer in an observation space, you're more in the, as you said, interactive space.
And the big complication is that the sound engineer has no idea what you're going to do. So there's you can't predict, you can only guess, so you have to kind of cover all your bases.
And covering all our bases comes to my next question, nice little segue, which is whether you are dealing with Atmos or mixing in Atmos or mixing ambisonics, if you're mixing on headphones, which most of us are, how do you know what you're delivering for the end user? How can you check your mixes in a space, for example, if what you're doing, so most people most likely, if they have a job to mix in Atmos, whether it be a music project or whatever, are not going to have the access to a true Atmos certified room. And especially in terms of ambisonics, you also will not have access at your fingertips, unless of course you go to NYU, to be able to experience your mix from a binaural listening perspective into an actual room that's configured for ambisonics. So what would you say, how do we deal with this? Are there ways to get around this problem in terms of knowing what you're delivering?
Well, what we're hearing from people in the trends we're talking to, and many people will start the project on headphones and then move and try to get into a room with speakers, and myself included, it's a good workflow. You're at home, you're on the train, wherever. I mean, it's incredibly portable, and that time is very useful. It's not just shooting in the dark. You really have a very good imaging. The balance is probably going to be okay. Some of the front scene is probably going to be perfect. Okay, some of the other things may be a little fuzzy, but people are reporting very good headphone to speaker. It's a very good workflow. So that's exciting that you don't. I was very excited about that people don't need all these speakers. They can just work on their headphones. And with students, sometimes the very first foray into this is through headphones because it's just so portable and so easy. And that gets people excited. And that's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
I think it's very exciting the fact that we are able to do this, to do a virtual rendition of a multi-speaker experience in our headphones, and you get it at the ballpark. And I think it's just so amazing because it makes these technologies so accessible to everybody. A number of years ago you couldn't do that. You had to go in a studio that had all the speakers and had all the setup to do this. You no longer have to do that. So it gets you in the ballpark, it gets you very close. If you can check your mix in the regular room, that's great, that's even better, especially if you can do it regularly. If you can do it a bunch of times, then you develop this experience, then after a while, well, this is what you need to do, and you figure out that translation, so you have to go less and less into the big room with the loudspeakers, and you can rely more on the headphones to get it much closer.
Yeah, with some of the, I agree, like now that, especially with headphones, and it makes sense that we have more tools for binaural, more tools with, say, they have virtual simulated rooms where you can kind of experience, what would be a multi-channel system through your headphones. I've done that before for clients as well, especially during COVID when they don't have access to these rooms. So we might lose some information, as Paul mentioned, of things possibly from behind us or something, unless it's in VR. That's totally different. But you can at least get in the ballpark and get some idea in terms of like maybe the frontal image, and then if there's something missing in the back, you kind of know, well, it's in the back, so I'm missing, so it's probably back there. Yeah, because I do VR. For speaking with VR, you can see that we have that video, so at least, you know, if we need to provide that, we can provide that video for them and do like a run demo. And if you're working with games, obviously it needs to be play tested by multiple people. So that's always the thing too, having different ears kind of listen to it. People with different experiences as well. Not just engineers, but, you know, regular people that, you know, gamers, pretty much.
Yeah, as Troy mentions, the head tracking is very important because, you know, we got a good fix on this, and head tracking, you know, look at all your speakers that aren't there and address them. It's wonderful. I mean, to me, I'm really excited about head tracking systems. I wish they were a little easier. We were talking earlier about connection, and I'm really hoping it'll be like all DAWs will just be, you know, put this thing on your head, put the headphones on, and you don't have to go through a bunch of third-party connections and all that, right? But I don't know what's holding that up, but it'll be great when we get it. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of Atmos, though, you can't really create head-tracked audio, can you? In terms of it, you know.
Why not? Why not?
Okay.
Give it to us, please.
You know, because if I remember, what is it? The new Dolby Atmos renderer is offering now head tracking. But as I understand it, it's more the entire mix head tracking, not individual components that are head tracked. So for example, you know, in my experience, I send a fixed mix that has a VO as well as music, and then everything else can be head tracked. So if you're watching, say, an experiential VR 360 in a headset, when I turn my head, I can hear, you know, John talking to me, you know, center. And then when I turn my head back, he's on the side. But the music and the VO stay the same, you know, because nobody wants to hear a VO moving around when your head moves. That's just insane. So is that something that can be implemented in Atmos at this time?
I don't know.
It sounds like crosstalk in a way, because there are crosstalk cancellation usually deals with two speakers. And I've seen, you know, very new projects where it does do head tracking, and I think if we can do it with two speakers with head tracking for crosstalk, it could be possible to do it with multiple speakers. It'll take a lot because the algorithm with crosstalk is already a lot, it's like multiple times, but if that could work, I feel like in the future down the line that could probably work. One user could just move around the space.
Well, I guess that's going to be for next week, right?
Possibly.
We've got people from Dolby in the room. I'll be like,
Excuse
me.
Please.
But you know, but
Please
to
tell us.
answer your question, I think that, so here's the beauty about object-based audio. You can specify which objects are going to be, are locked, and then which objects you allow for the head tracking to contribute so that you have this stable image. As soon as you have somebody talking to you here, you have a head tracker on, it allows you to do this. Without the head tracker, you're doing this, right? But some objects you may not want. You want it to be stable. You don't want the world to be moving around. So, and you can do that in object-based audio. You can lock some objects, and then others you allow to be stable in the environment.
So would the deliverables be the same? Say that you would have a fixed audio mix, and then you would also have a head track mix, like you would do, say.
I love that, you know, because I think in the real world, when we turn our head, we know what's going to happen. The whole world is spinning around. But if you're sitting stable and, you know, like in headphones, it feels very weird when you. I think that's why head tracking was a fail with a lot of music producers in the beginning, because they turned their head and the vocal in it. No way, I'm not doing this.
Over here,
So then people started putting the vocal in the quad. So wherever you looked, you heard a voice, right? That's kind of a weird fix. I'd rather, as Agnieszka said, just lock the vocal. And I think, you know, lock, unlocked, you know, this is really good. And I've experimented with this, doing two simultaneous mixes, one in a head tracking system, one without, and just putting some stuff locked, some stuff not. Tried this years ago, and found a lot of success having this double thing. So I don't know where the industry's at with locked and unlocked. I think MPH, I don't want to misspeak, but I think they're pretty good about that, perhaps. I don't know. Wait, question for next week.
Right.
I think
But I think
production-wise,
this is also where it gets very interesting, which is now you're unlocking what is the artistic intent.
Right.
So having these technical possibilities unlocks the artistic world to do creative things with these things and to push the technology even further because a number of years ago we couldn't do all this stuff, so you were limited with what you could do. But unlocking this really allows the artists, the musicians, the songwriters, the engineers to think about, okay, how can we take the arts to the next level?
Right.
I think that's where it gets interesting.
And to segue then also to the future, as it's 9:18, I want to ask, I'd like to hear more about the Music and Audio Research Lab and the work of the Immersive Audio Group. Could you give us an update on what type of projects or research is being done currently?
Yeah, so we have our program is quite large. We have very, very smart students in our program who are working on a gamut of projects, research projects. So in the master's program, all students are required to do a master's thesis, and so they work on research. On one end, it's some basic research in spatial hearing and HRTFs and so on, all the way through recording and production. Paul does an amazing program, Tonmeister program, where he works with students to think about, well, you can talk about it.
Sounds good to me.
About immersive sound capture and reproduction, and students are also working in the VR AR space. One of my PhD students, Marta, who is working on finishing her doctoral work, is looking at ways in a 6 degrees of freedom experience for augmented reality to create a system where you can't distinguish which sounds are real, coming from the real world, and which ones are virtually simulated. So she's at the point where you can have a 6 degrees of freedom experience, which is hard because you're walking next to objects and you have the directivity pattern. But we're at the point where it's so plausible, maybe not acoustically perfect, but it doesn't have to always be acoustically perfect, but it's plausible enough where you just can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not real.
That's fascinating.
And that's really exciting.
And also industry-wise, there's artists who are being kind of bullied into making Atmos mixes these days because they want to get on that list, but and then once they sit with their producer engineer who's experienced Atmos, they start to get excited about it, and I'm very looking forward to more immersive from the ground up. Like instead of taking an old mix and turning it into immersive, let's think in quad, let's think in 3D, and think about that from the composition side. So I think in the future we're going to have really magnificent, more magnificent experiences because the creative people will take the ball and run with it. I'm certain of this once it happens, and we're kind of in a very early stages right now.
Right.
Yeah, so, like right now with all the research that's being done, and the students are coming up with great ideas, and a lot of the research that a lot of our master's students are doing, including undergrads as well, is working on how to mix music in Atmos. Because for right now, Atmos makes very much sense for cinema with sound design and sound objects. But for music, not so much right now. I actually did like a short little quiz with one of my students' classes, and a lot of them say that Atmos mixes for music don't really sound good.
I think if you overthink it, it doesn't sound so great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't need to hear the shaker behind my head.
Yeah,
That's not working out. Yeah.
I don't need to hear the guitar buzzing in my in my sinuses. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool, and we're experimenting on that, and maybe that again, this is the end goal. Maybe that's what they're going for. But one thing I recommend to students when they do want to mix for Atmos is I think what we need to do is start from the very beginning, which is the recording. Right, because there's some there's some Atmos mixes where the intent at the recording stage is for Atmos, and it sounds absolutely amazing because they're using the right microphone techniques and putting the right placements in consideration of where they're going to actually place those sound as objects in Atmos. So or VR, same thing. So that's where that's what I'm doing with my research partner is that we're thinking about going from the very beginning is how do we record something three-dimensionally and not just as a mono source, and then put them in the 3D space. So to keep it consistent. So instead of starting from 2D and then now we're trying to make it 3D, we start all the way from 3D and then we come out still 3D. So that's
Seems
kind
like
of
the natural progression.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe right now I'm sure we're now thinking about even from the composer or the performer themselves are now thinking about 3D tools for them to use and thinking about how to compose for 3D or for immersive. So.
Right, these 3D live spaces too, like these domes. I mean the bands are gonna start to get into 3D. Sound live, we're very excited about that. So I think we're right at the very exciting time right now. We're going to see some great stuff, and there's a lot of research to be done, and it's a great time to be in this work in this field right now.
I mean, you could also look at it, I've thought about this a few times, where you could actually, in the VR space, have people interacting with the music itself. So, they can change the music as they listen. You know what I mean? Which is nuts. But, and I don't think many musicians are going to be happy about that.
Right.
Many mix engineers will be like, what are you doing with my mix? It was perfect. Now you're messing it up. What's up with that? So yeah, I mean, there were just so many open-ended questions about where this technology is going to go. And I love the idea of starting 3D and keeping it in that world. My last question, before we open it up to questions from our audience, we've been talking about applications for ambisonic or Atmos in music and entertainment. Are there other fields of study where ambisonics can be helpful, say in the health realm? VR has been very helpful in terms of surgeons being able to, better
Navigating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To better navigate what they're doing in their surgeries, or even give them a template as to where to start. Imaging and things of that sort has been really helpful. Do you see a future of ambisonics in the healthcare realm, or say the military realm, or any of these other fields of study? Do you see there being a future outside of music and entertainment?
I can answer
I
that. So I think that there are, because I know our topic here is application, there are so many applications where sound is currently, it's not the future, it's being used right now. We here have in fact a research project that looks at using spatial audio, including ambisonics, for balance research. We're doing this in collaboration with the physiotherapy department here at NYU, where we're looking at how sound, in the VR space, but sound significantly can impact how a person can stabilize their balance. So this is particularly important for people who are perhaps a little bit elderly or have problems with balance, and we can train them to help them keep their balance. So, and sound is being used a lot in healthcare, right? And there are so many other applications where you mentioned military. I mean, certainly military sound is very important. In my previous life before NYU, I worked more in the mission critical space, and we were developing spatial audio in the 90s and early 2000s to help fighter pilots and soldiers and other people operate sound. And the reason is that sound is our first and most important sense for survival in nature. So sound is very important for that. And I don't want to omit education. right? So education, this idea of experiential computing in healthcare and in education, incorporating environments where students can learn from pre-K through higher education, where sound and a virtual environment can augment how we are learning. I mean, learning is still very traditional. We sit in the classroom, we have a whiteboard, we have a computer, we maybe have some examples, but it's still a very traditional way of thinking. Right now, there are a lot of people, including here at NYU, who are thinking about, well, how do we integrate that next level into how we teach and into how students learn. Sound is a big component of it, and especially if you're talking about teaching music, that's a whole other thing, but just in a regular classroom, teaching about biology and about how cells are made. There's a lot of people who are right now exploring that.
I was curious about hearing aids and how ambisonics can be helpful. I remember when I was younger, my grandmother would always complain about her hearing aids because she said she heard everything at once. There was no directional, like you just couldn't really place sounds and everything just sounded like it was one great big cacophonous sound. Is there any research with ambisonics and hearing aids, for example, to help people better differentiate direction?
Well, I don't know about ambisonics specifically, but this idea of having bionic hearing and having an acoustic spotlight that you can flash into a direction, that is something that has been researched for quite a while right now. This idea of having hearing aids for non-hearing impaired people. You sit in a restaurant, crazy loud, you can't have a conversation. It's so difficult to hear the person who's sitting in front of you, so you end up yelling. It's not necessary to do that. So there are quite a few people right now looking at how can we, and I mean you can already do this, I think, with your iPhone. You can turn your iPhone, you have your earbuds, and you can point it in a direction and you can hear that person from that direction. So that the technology is there, it exists. It's more a question of, well, how do we get it in a form factor that is wearable, where the biggest problem usually is power. Like, how do you, it takes power, so how do you put a battery in there that lasts enough? But people are working on this, and I'm sure that we're going to see this in our daily lives.
All we need is a USB port, that's all.
Frankenstein,
Yeah. Your brain has electrical impulses, just could you imagine? All right, well, I guess it's time for us to open up to the floor with any questions that anybody might have, please. You're right, Frank. Do we have a microphone
We
for?
don't have a microphone handy, so if everyone doesn't mind coming up and asking the question loudly from the
Here,
front.
take my mic.
Facebook would appreciate it, and so will the audience.
It's not connected.
So,
You can face that. Thank you.
See, that'll be the question seat.
So of course, most of us here, sitting here, are like working in the audio industry, including myself. And every time like we receive some material from the artist, we're thinking about the delivery format, like what's happening right now. Like basically, when we talk about like tracking mixes, we're talking about what customers are using to hear our music right now. And we're thinking about like everything right now. Instead of thinking about like what's in the future, like maybe they are using. Maybe they will have all animals room like in their own room and this and that way, but we don't try to think it that way. So but then next step we talk about the approachability. We talk about like since I was student, I was here and I was working on like animals mixes. I also compare my mixes when mixing in binaural form, even with or without head tracking, it provides so much a different experience compared to like between like hearing it binaurally with the headphones and sitting in an animal's room with multi-speaker setup. So my question was like, do you think from the approachability viewpoint for like consumers, do you think how far are we from them to a point that they appreciate more with the multi-speaker setup, or some way that they can experience the animal's music besides just wearing headphones? Of course, right nowadays there was like animals theaters that we can go to, and people can just buy a ticket and go there to appreciate. But other than that, it feels like the binaural form with headphones is like the only solution for now. Do we have any other, like how far are we from the point that those systems become more portable and more approachable? And do you think it's necessary for the customers to appreciate more about the multi-speaker setup besides binaural, or do you think that binaural solution right now is already pretty ideal and we should go forward with this binaural experience?
So let's consider how many people in their home have a stereo system that is really nicely set up. Usually you have, most people have one speaker here, one speaker there, and that's just stereo. So I think that there's a barrier. It took many, many years for stereo systems to come into people's homes. 2 speakers, adding that extra speaker. You will always have people who have their beautiful setups, the surround sound. I think that the technology is more accessible in the sense it's easier now. You have the sound bar. You no longer need to buy the 5 speakers. Anybody can have that. And it's going to be better than just having 2 speakers and one up in the plant, one behind your couch. So I think that exists. Whether people will feel the need to have the multi-speaker at home, I don't know. I do imagine a future at some point where there will be wallpaper that you buy, and it's going to be with thousands of tiny little transducers, and it's going to be easy. But it's going to be easy. Right now, the entry point for people to have that multi-speaker setup in a way that can really create the experience that was intended, the entry point is still pretty high, but it's going to get lower. And I'm sure somebody will invent something that you paint something on the wall, and it's just going to be a bunch of loudspeakers.
And while you were speaking, I also thought about like in stereo audio, people were treating both the stereo system as an experience, but also pay a lot of attention to the content of the music. And sometimes, like I know a lot of people, like when I make something for artists or for somebody, they sometimes check the mix on the phone. And in a way, of course, you wouldn't get the experience of listening stereo and have like the panning, like the sound feel with that. But also, it didn't miss too much about the music content of the stereo music a lot of times. Like you can still hear the vocal clearly, how these vocals sit in mix when people listen on the phone. But with Atmos mix, I think it a lot differently, because I think for now, right now at this point of time, a lot of artists didn't create the music content with the Atmos system in their mind. They recorded and created the music still with the stereo in mind, and when we put in the Atmos format, it actually didn't. The Atmos didn't really interfere too much with the creation of the music content. Basically, so right now it feels like the Atmos, the value of the Atmos for a music listener, customer, consumer, is more about the experience. So that gap between the Atmos and stereo system, although they both have entry point, but it's like in the music content wise, it's like it's like a different viewpoint to the customer.
Yeah.
So maybe, but like you said, maybe with the content, when the Atmos system become more accessible, there will be more producers, more artists create the content with the Atmos system in mind, so it will be different from just creating like the stereo.
Right.
So that might probably change.
Yeah, and I think there's one other thing I want to mention as you're talking about this, and it is the idea of intelligent systems. And I mean, there are systems right now. We have one of our colleagues at Princeton at Virtuary who is working on on personal sound zones, where you have you hear one content, you hear another content, you hear another content. And I think we're at a point right now where we understand acoustics, we understand how sound works, and where to place loudspeakers, and we can incorporate intelligence into the systems, where you don't have to have 100 loudspeakers in your home. Maybe if you have a couple or a few, with an intelligent system that can see where you are, where your ears are, and deliver the content to you as it was intended. I mean that it exists. It's not, you can't buy it in the grocery store on the corner, but that kind of intelligence, I think, is something that we can expect to see more and more in our audio reproduction systems.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Like object audio kind of like merge very cleverly, kind of with like intelligence, and make that object audio adaptability become more like Yeah, thank you for your answers.
Yeah, just
Thank
to add
you for
real
your
quick,
question.
there's folks working on also, like you have Sonos and you have your Bose and you have your JBL Clip and just systems to use all your speakers to do like what Agnieszka is saying, have a smart system, but you can mix and match devices, you know, that's really cool. I like that a lot, just to more accessibility. And the speaker bars are, I heard some speaker bars recently, they're just making leaps and bounds in sound qualities.
Yeah, it's on the list. Please, come up.
Thank you for this. Has been really interesting. So not to sound nihilistic in any way, but what do you think is the point of all this? Like, what do you think? Is this on its way to replace stereo, or is it like what is the advancement of technology? What's its purpose?
Well, humans are, you know, crazy. You know? We keep just getting bigger, and, you know, I don't know.
I mean, the same question could have been asked when CDs came out. What's the point? We already have vinyl.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and nowadays, I guess vinyl is making a comeback, but I'm sure CDs will come back and just like, what? No pops.
But
Wow.
I'd like to say this though: when an immersive system is working well and you turn it off, people go, "What?" You know, put it back on. So you know, I think more experience, better artistic delivery. Just you know, human experience is it's positive. I think entertainment, a lot of good reasons to do it.
It's a very philosophical question.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that humans have always strived to go beyond what is.
That's right.
Human creativity keeps growing, and this is how we thrive. And even when we were cavemen, we went into caves. Wow, I mean, imagine the acoustics in caves. Absolutely incredible. And it was a connection to something that is surreal. And so I think the point of what we're doing here, beyond just having something to do, is to allow human creativity to go beyond where it is right now. And it's at that nice intersection between artists and technologists and scientists, and we all work together to advance. And now technology is at a point where we can, it's kind of becoming a part of us. I mean, I walk down the street, I see people walking with their phones. It's like, it's becoming a part of us. I'm sure that, given maybe 100 years, 1,000 years, our thumbs will become a lot bigger because we're doing this. I mean, technology has just become such a big part of us, and it allows us to go above and beyond of what we can just do within ourselves. So I think the point of what we're discussing here today is, how can we extend human creativity? How can we extend the art? The point is not the technology. The point is not ambisonics or object-based. It's a tool that we use. And in 5 years and 10 years, there might be something else and something else again. It's a tool that we use to extend that human creativity.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's a bit philosophical, but just thank you.
Good question. Who's next?
Question, yeah.
Yes, come on up. Rowie, do we have any Facebook Live questions?
I've been watching that, not as of yet.
I just had a question for you. I thought the inverse, like, sort of ambisonic mic setup was really cool. So in Unity, in like the implementation side, is it that you try and place the objects, like how you place the microphones in the world, and then are there extra tools that you have in Unity that kind of force it to give it a direction in which you're capturing, or is it like you just pick? Because as far as I remember, a mono source in like a Unity is kind of everywhere. It's not directional, especially like you're going around everywhere. So how is that? Were there any challenges in the way you set it up?
Yeah, so for what we did specifically, obviously we have to use some kind of VR application to kind of process all those sources. So I use Steam VR. I like it more because it gives you, there's extra features for you to consider, like occlusion, which makes it more realistic because then you can have the correct acoustics for blockage and all that kind of stuff. And also it allows you to change the polar patterns, which was which is what we really needed, because if we were going to replicate the capsules we're using are cardioid. Now, the one thing that is a little bit challenging for us is how it's a bit too flexible, because you can change the polar pattern however you want to. You can make it like a big cardioid or a small cardioid. And placement is also very difficult as well. For certain microphone techniques like the reverse tetra, like we know where that placement is going to be. It's going to be in a perfect tetra cluster. But for certain things like for the ambience object, we kind of have to kind of eyeball it or make some kind of calculation, which is kind of going back to like there's no standard for mixing. Right? So that's something that we're kind of looking into, like how can we translate, what is 15 feet in real life to Unity. So that's something that it's a lot of trial and error right now and play testing with users and seeing what makes sense for them and their experience. And of course, if it's something that we can't really control ourselves because it's more based on the listener's own subjective perspective of it, then we can create tools for them. So for instance, we have in some of our VR spaces, we allow users to look at an object, and then these features pop up where they could control volume or panning or something of the object themselves. So again, I think that'd be useful for users, because sometimes when you put them into that space, they're like, I don't know what to do with myself. They're just walking around. So you can kind of give them these tools so that they could feel comfortable in the space and make the space more comfortable for themselves.
Do you see the same sort of like capture system work for like linear media? And do you think there are tools in place to like ingest that content and like say put it as part of a music, like a track mix? Are there already tools that exist that can do that, or are there new tools necessary for it to happen?
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working on this idea of it's related to Pari's work in a linear way. Is you have a sound and we have what I call supporting sound. So normally we're used to recording you, but I'm interested in what your reflection off the floor or the wall is, and to reproduce that in an ammo system isn't very complicated. You just have those signals and you put them where they should be, and your listener's in the sweet spot, and it works. And actually the sounds, for me, they kind of pop out of the speakers. The first time I did it, I thought, oh my goodness, like, I remember we recorded a wind quintet with an AB of sound-filled mics with Vislav, and when we played it back, I had never heard sound pop out of the speaker before. Both of us just looked at each other, it was like, oh my God, wow. So I've been hooked on this, so it's not terribly complicated. You just need to capture, just like Pari's capturing these radiation characteristics for linear. It's more about capturing the sound and what I call the supporting sound. And I would like to see speakers that have direct and diffuse outputs. Like you have a direct sound from a speaker, and then you also have a diffuse. It's pretty simple. And I've done this. I've set up two speakers and had one signal coming this way, one signal going that way, and you start to get a holographic image from the speaker. And now we have these bricks that can do things. So I'm looking forward to a different format for speakers. I mean, it's kind of out there. but I've done experiments and it works. So you can use our existing tools. You just have to, there's no plugin made for it. Like Pari's got to manually have multiple objects with different, there's no way to do it, but we just hammer it out. Yeah. We have enough tools, but there's no simple one. We have to make it.
Thanks, sir.
Sure.
By the way, I work for Dolby, so I can answer any little questions that anyone has.
Thanks so much.
I'm quite new to Dolby, but yeah, I'm happy to answer.
Well, definitely next week when we have our next Dolby, and we'll continue the discussion. Is there any other questions from our audience? Yes, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been very interesting. So I guess more of a technical question. It's probably going to be a long, loaded question. Back to ambisonics and use of multiple ambisonic mics, and I'm really fascinated by that concept. first of all, have you tried recording a band with multiple episodic mics?
Yes, yes.
And,
Yeah.
oh, okay, so, good, because that leads to the next question. How do you handle the bass management if there's so much buildup? Is it something that you deal with in the mix, or you filter it out going in, or it's like?
Yeah.
Can I also add one little thing?
Yeah, sure.
And phase variance.
I was just gonna say, yeah, exactly. Because I noticed with the reverse tetrahedron setup, everything was evenly spaced and centered off. I guess it was measured specifically in order to avoid phase issues. But how do you do that with multiple ambisonic mics? Because if let's say one capsule is facing an opposite direction from another one that's directly
You're talking about the bleed from the other musicians in the live space?
well, that in addition to just the collection of low frequencies with multiple microphones in different positions.
Right,
Unless your space you're recording in is so well acoustically designed that it filters out a lot of the low frequency issues, it's gotta be
Sure.
troublesome.
Well, actually, the thing is, when you're beamforming, you lose a lot of low end. So we actually have the other problem. We're not getting a lot of bass, because when you form the beam, the first thing to go is the bass.
Right.
Huh.
Because your
So
beamforming is canceling things out. So
Right.
the premise is you have positive phase and you have sound from the back minus phase. But bass, as we know, with the bass has such a long wavelength, it hits all the capsules all the time. So the minute you start forming a beam, you start losing your low end. So it's actually the other way around. When I recorded a band with multiple tetra mics, I found didn't have enough bass and had to, have an omni in the room or something to get the warmth back. So oddly enough, it's kind of works out. But I understand your concern. If you had a bunch of studio mics set up like that, you'd have all this boominess.
Right.
But you don't have it with the beam forms, because the directionality is in the high end. So when you start forming a beam, you're picking up a lot of high end, and it's just the way it is. Yeah. So it's not an issue. No.
Oh wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But bleed from the other players could be, but it's actually kind of cool because you have multiple perspectives of everything. So, engineers who worked in the old days when the band was in the room, they always say, "Oh yeah, I missed that sense of being in the room and there, and also the multiple perspectives." So, if you're the drummer and I'm the guitar player, I'm getting a little bleed from the drums over here, but that's another perspective of the drums, which normally you don't get. And if that's placed in the right place in the Atmos mix, that's pretty cool. So it's a you're in the band situation, right? It's not going to work maybe in stereo so well, but it's a different thing.
And with the bleed, do you feel that have you seen it actually cause phase variance?
No, because the bleed should be decorrelated enough. You have something very close. It's getting a signal. By the time that signal hits the back of the other mic, it's much lower. It's met up with floor reflections. It's a different signal by the time it gets over there. So it hasn't been a problem yet. So.
Great. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question.
Questions?
All righty, our time is coming to an end. Do we have a last questioner? Going once. Bueller? Bueller? Some of you don't get that reference, it's okay.
I would ask a quick question.
Sure.
So I think one of the things about mixing is often that you can be very controlled in terms of like sweet spots, and I think something interesting about ambisonics is relinquishing control, the idea that different users would have different experiences. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about if there's some element of, it's almost like viewing a sculpture versus a painting. There's multiple angles to experience this object. In VR and other experiences, have you seen users interact with your sound in surprising ways, or have you felt like relinquishing that control because it can be viewed from many angles is interesting?
Yeah, so one of the things that my research partner and I can sometimes run into, and honestly, we kind of got away with it with some of our miking techniques with the reverse tetra and stuff like that, because the reverse tetra also takes into account of sounds coming from the bottom part. not that it doesn't really happen too often, but when we play tested some of the things, we do find some of our players actually deciding to like put their head underneath or like just sleeping on the floor or something in order just to get a different perspective. And it's kind of really cool because then they're like, oh wow, I could feel the kick like punching from the floor to my ears or something like that. So I would say that we wouldn't really want to eliminate, and it's kind of hard to eliminate that anyways, in speaking in VR, because it's just such an open space for the user to just do whatever they want. So one of the things, I think it's like an automatic default in Unity, is that you can have the player jump. So we have play testers jumping across the drum kit, things like that, hearing the sound. And the cool thing is that we did have one person do that, and they do hear the sound swoop over.
Yeah.
And with again, this is with the techniques that we use, is that it accounts for that sound because it's actually capturing the radiation. So if we were to actually jump over a drum kit in real life, we actually hear, we do hear,
Kurt Cobain,
we do hear that change because that radiation is being captured and it's being reflected in space. So yeah, I mean, I would, unless you put a direction that says do not go under the drum kit.
I mean, and to answer your question, I mean, the listener can just find the spot and chill, and they don't have to jump around. You know, I mean, you have the option to stick your head in the kick drum or not, but you know, it may be a little gimmicky in the beginning, like people just say, hey, can I do this, can I do that? I mean, they're going to get bored of that, maybe, or maybe not, I don't know, but at least they have the option, you know. So, yeah, it's a very good question, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I do believe that our question segment is done. We don't have anything from Facebook Live. People. We got a lot of great questions. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, we are going to close off the Facebook in a moment, and then we'll hold the raffle that we promised everyone in person. So do that in just a second. Again, we have a great event on the 5th regarding Dolby Atmos. Maybe some of the questions that came up today in that department will get covered there. Thanks to the panelists. It was great, insightful, very informative, and intriguing discussion. And thanks everyone for coming and joining us. Hope to see you again at our next events.
Thank you.
Thank you.